Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's panel for CSW 66. I'm Sheetal Ranjan, a professor of justice studies and sociology at Montclair State University in New Jersey, USA. I'm joining Montclair State University on April 1st this year, which is a couple of days away. But the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, Dr. Peter Kingston, was very kind to facilitate the hosting of this panel through Montclair, even before my official start date, and to make all the resources available to me. I'd like to thank AJ Kelton, the director of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences Digital Media Collab, for setting this webinar up, and my colleague, Dr. Vanessa Michaelson, who has graciously offered to moderate the chat and lead the Q&A session in the end. She's on the one of the panelists, and she's my colleague in the Justice Studies Department at Montclair State University, although I know her for many years before that. So this panel today is the first of our 4 collaborative themed panels on feminist approaches to justice, sponsored by 4 organizations. The Division on Women and Crime of the American Society of Criminology that I represent, the World Society of Victimology that Don Buechner represents, and the International Sociological Association and Criminologists Without Borders that Dr. Rosemary Barbary represents. The American Society of Criminology is an international organization having a consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. And DWC is one of its divisions. DWC is Division on Women and Crime. We tend to call it DWC. I serve on the executive board of the division as its past chair. We started doing CSWs when I first became chair of the Division on Women and Crime, and I've continued every year since then. The DWC itself facilitates and promotes research and theory development, pedagogical strategies, and curricular enhancement that strengthen the links between gender, crime, and justice. And that's why our panels are always themed around justice and criminal justice, as you might have seen in the past. The DWC also recognizes the achievements of women as students and professional scholars in the study of criminology through its annual awards program. It encourages networking, which we are hoping and which we've facilitated through this CSW. As you would have seen, we put together disparate people, to work together, and researchers, practitioners, students, all of them. And you will see in each panel, we have a practitioner and an academic each. All of them will be addressing issues related to South Asian women in justice professions. We provide a number of opportunities for professional development like we're doing today, and have feminist theory and action workshops, presentations of gender, crime, and justice. The co-sponsoring organizations that I mentioned are all EcoSource accredited, and my partnership is with the UN representatives, as I mentioned, Dr. Rosemary Barbary from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, who's probably in one of the attendees today, and Dr. Don Buechner from Illinois State University, who's also, watching us through the attendee side of things. We have been doing CSW panels together for the past few years, and each year we've released a special issue, journal issue, which is peer-reviewed based on the CSW themes for that year, primarily based out of the submissions we received for our panels. We have 3 other panels this week, which are from these other, organizations, and you might have seen that in our joint flyer. So speaking about CSW themes, we have a presentation today related to the priority theme of this year's CSW, which is achieving gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls in the context of climate change, environmental and disaster reduction policies and programs. I think the presentation on policing, that COVID's impact on policing is directly related to the priority theme. In terms of COVID being a natural disaster, which has affected so many of us. In fact, all of us, the whole world, nobody was spared. And the review theme for this year's CSW 66 is women's economic empowerment in the changing world of work. And almost all our presentations speak to, women justice professionals and their world of work and how it has changed over time. This in general is a great area of interest to feminist criminologists in DWC. So many of our researchers have spent years studying the participation of women justice professionals and what it means for, crime and justice. So the goal of our collaborative effort with the 4 organizations is always to draw attention to regions of the world which are not usually studied often. So you may see a lot in the academic literature, a lot of panels related, which are, Eurocentric or US-centric, and we kind of, between us, we feel that we have to spread this knowledge far wider, which is not commonly seen. So this year, because very little is known in the academic literature, while amazing work is happening. For example, India has 4 Supreme Court justices, and here we're trying hard to, get our first Black woman, today is the hearing for her on the Supreme Court. So it's very interesting from that perspective. So this year I started out with the idea of doing a panel focused on South Asia, a region with a population of 2 billion, accounting for about 25% of the world's population. And as I was putting together these panels, I quickly realized that I'm looking for knowledgeable speakers. You know how I reached out to each of you and, found you and tried to, understand what you're doing. I quickly realized this undertaking covering all of South Asia is very difficult, and it narrowed down just to India, which accounts for 1.4 billion out of the 2 billion in the South Asian region. This is my favorite CSW I have done this far. And I'm most proud of the panel I put together for 3 reasons. First, of course, today's panel focuses on my country of birth, India. So it means a lot to me that I have a panelist full of Indian women out here, which makes me so excited and happy. Second, my late mother, Aruna Jain, was a justice professional in India. She was a lawyer serving many underprivileged and disadvantaged women, while herself navigating very challenging work circumstances and raising a family in a very conservative joint family household. So for those of you from India, you understand exactly what I mean, what she went through to bring all of us up to get here. So it means a lot to me to see all of you justice professionals in front of me. And third, and this reason would have even made my mother very proud, and probably more proud of me. If she were alive now, she would have been bragging to the whole world about all of the people on the screen today. How far, the combination of knowledge, experience, determination, courage of today's speakers, and how far ahead they have reached in their respective careers is truly phenomenal. I'm not going to read out their biographies, but I'm sharing it here in the PDF in the chat once I finish my remarks. And I hope you take the time to look at it and read about them. Today, we have 4 presentations drawn from a range of justice professions. The first one on the impact of COVID-19 on personal and professional lives of women police officers in Kerala is being co-presented by Dr. Sandhya Bhartas, Director General of Police, Fire and Rescue Services, Kerala in India, and Dr. Jyoti Belur, Associate Professor, University College London from UK. The second topic is women in the court system in India, focusing on lawyers, litigants, witnesses, and potential beneficiaries, co-presented by Dr. Sashikala Gurpur, Dean of the Symbiosis School of Law in Pune, India, and Justice Dr. Shalini Fansalkar Joshi, who is former judge of the High Court of Mumbai. The third topic is also women in the court system, but from a judicial perspective, and is being co-presented by Justice Geeta Mitha, former Chief Justice of the High Court of Jammu and Kashmir in India, and Professor Deepika Jain, who's Professor of Law at the Jindal Global Law School. The final topic is about women's experiences navigating prisons in India from a social perspective. And it made me very happy to have something from the prisons, because I was struggling a little bit, because it's easier to get justice professionals on the court end. So I kind of tapped on my colleague and friend, Natasha, and said, Natasha, you got to help me here. I need something from the prisons. We don't have a separate correctional system per se, which is national, but you got to figure this out. So what I'm very happy about, it's a combination of corrections and social work perspective. And I'm very thankful for, Dr. Penelope Tong, who is a social worker and field supervisor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, India, who will co-present along with Natasha Bharadwaj, who is the founder of the South Asian Institute of Crime and Justice Studies in India, but also a doctoral candidate right down the road from me at Rutgers School of Criminal Justice in the USA. So together, I'm really looking forward to this. Each topic gets about 20 minutes. I'll provide gentle reminders, as I mentioned to you, at the 15 and 18-minute mark. And we will have a hard stop at 20 minutes to turn it over to the next presenter. Question and answers will be done after all the panelists have completed their presentations. However, you can type them in the chat box at any time. Dr. Michaelson will be collecting all of them and will direct them to the panelists towards the end. So with that, I pass it on to Dr. Jyoti Belur and Dr. Sandhya Bhartdas for their presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in, and I hope you have a great time. I'm looking forward to this learning experience, and I hope you are too.
Thank you, Dr. Ranjan. I'll just share my screen and we can start. Is that okay? Okay. Dr. Sandhya. You're muted. I don't think we can hear you.
No, we still can't hear you, Dr. Sandhya. You're still muted. Dr. Sandhya Bhartdas and Dr. Jyoti Belur, AJ. Two people, so please keep both of them on. Everyone, AJ is managing, he's the director of the Digital Media Lab, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. We don't know, I don't know at this point at whose end the problem is, so I see the spotlight on both of them. Jyoti, do you mind giving a brief introduction in the meanwhile? Yeah. You're audible, but the audio is not great, but go ahead. Now it's loud and clear.
Now it's clear.
I hear the Malayalam. Sandhya, you can go ahead. It's very clear now.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes, very audible. Thank you.
Is it okay? Audio, is it okay?
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Professor Sheetal. In the beginning itself, I'm extremely happy that my co-presenter, Dr. Jyoti, and me got an opportunity to present a study report on women in policing, impact of COVID-19 on personal and professional lives of women police officers in Kerala. Kerala is one of the most progressive states in India, bagging the #1 position in maintenance of law and order for several consecutive years in the India Today surveys. Achieving gender equality and empowerment of women, especially in the context of pandemic situation in police service, is a goal of Kerala Police, which goes well with the focus of this event. Jyoti, please move on to the second slide. Kerala, a state having more than 50% demographic representation for women, and we used to have matrilineal system of inheritance among majority communities in Kerala. So we had the first women police wing started in 1939. The first all-woman police station was started by none other than the then Prime Minister of India, Srimati Indira Gandhi, in 1973. The first woman IPS officer in the state of Kerala was appointed in 1987 to reach the rank of Director General of Police. I started my career in 1988, the second woman IPS officer from my state. I have worked in the mainstream policing during every level of my promotion except that of the state police chief, with utmost acceptability from the society and respectability from my colleagues. I have been doing advocacy for women becoming a critical mass in the police service, especially after my finding during my research for my PhD thesis in 2002 that women victims wanted only women police to record their statements, and they felt more comfortable to approach the police station if women police are present in more numbers. So the statistics makes it very clear that the number of women in leadership position is not that great, but incremental increase can be noted. So let us see, from traditional sari to pants and shirt gives more freedom in performing duties as far as the police uniform is concerned. Let us see the evolution of roles and responsibilities of women police. Initially, women police were used only to arrest women lawbreakers. Now, we have a commando wing in the women battalion, and also we have women in dog squad, intelligence, and whatnot. Now, at the cutting edge level, sub-inspectors' position has been made gender neutral, and I could train the first batch of gender neutral police personnel at the cutting edge level. While we started a community policing project, namely the Janamaitri Suraksha project, of which I have been nodal officer for initial 12 years, we started sending a policeman and a policewoman together for foot patrol on beat duty. And these personnel used to visit every house, every village, every public place. This became very, very popular and instilled a lot of confidence among women. So this actually empowered the women police, and they became responsible for their beat area and community engagement. This was a revolutionary step. 8 women in police national conferences were held by the Bureau of Police Research and Development, and this led to identifying specific problems of policewomen and defining their role in policing the society. Similar state level conferences were also held, and such conferences also organize health checkups, counseling, etc. Kerala Police Association plays a major role in ensuring dignity of personnel in service. Committee for Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplaces is also functioning well. And let us see the findings of a previous Tata Institute of Social Science study. So women officers who required to play a mother's role had experienced a slightly higher level of role conflict. Interestingly, policewomen got married to men who are less educationally qualified and those from lower social strata compared to policemen. This is a qualitative observation, of course. Women are generally more responsible for household work, especially caring for children, the aged, and the disabled. So I would like Jyoti to take over to the current study which we have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandhya. I'd like to reiterate my thanks to Dr. Ranjan for inviting us to present at this conference. It's indeed a pleasure to be in the company of such august women. Following on from the previous study conducted by the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, our study focuses on understanding the impact of COVID-19 on the personal and professional lives of women police officers. Given the exemplary service provided by the police in Kerala, which was acknowledged to be among the best in the country, we felt it was important to understand the toll it might have taken on a very under-researched section of the police, which is the lower ranks of police, and especially women police constables and sub-inspectors. This survey was along the lines of a similar study conducted by Professors Fleming and Brown in England and Wales in 2021. In this study, we focus on understanding the context within which women worked, the myriad household and caring responsibilities they fulfill apart from their professional obligations. We also wanted to understand whether women feel that they are trusted by their line managers and in return feel appreciated by the organization. The survey explored women officers' perceptions on their working conditions prior to and during the lockdown, the first lockdown in 2020, and how it affected their well-being and psychological health. It was amazing because we set up this study after Professor Ranjan approached us, and we had less than a month to run it through the ethics committees of both of our institutions. We had to get the survey translated into Malayalam, and we had to get people on board to support us in administering the survey. And the response has been absolutely phenomenal. We've had, the last time I saw this morning, numbers have grown from 265, but in this study, in this presentation, I'm going to talk about 265 responses that we had received till last Friday. And what we found that officers were sent an anonymized link inviting them to participate in the survey and were assured of anonymity and confidentiality. We did not collect any identifying personal information. What we find, and this is just based on the raw statistics, an overwhelming majority of respondents were at the rank of constable, and over half the sample were posted in police stations. The rest of them worked in headquarters, special cells, or women-only battalions, or even something quite interestingly described as the Pink Patrol. 97% of the respondents were married, and the remaining reported that they were single and living with their parents. Interestingly, in line with what Dr. Sandhya said, only 20% of their spouses were in the police and other frontline emergency services. The rest of them were in a number of other professions. Over 88% of the total respondents said they had children, and 3/4 of them were responsible for children under the age of 18 and who were living with them. Again, overwhelmingly, 88% reported that they had caring responsibilities for elderly parents or relatives. When asked about their working conditions pre and during COVID, over 3/4 of the respondents said that they continued doing the same job they were doing before COVID. And although the nature of the job had not changed, what had changed was the fact that it was far more stressful and took much longer to do the same job. Interestingly, only 6% of the respondents said that they were able to partially or fully work from home. And that's quite different from what most of us might have experienced outside of India, maybe, and outside of the police, because a lot of us have spent the past 2 years working from home and rather tired of it, I think, by now. When you looked at home and care responsibilities, and these are figures for those respondents who said they were solely responsible for looking after their children or all these. And what was interesting is that a majority of the remaining participants said that they shared these caring responsibilities with their partner. It is noteworthy to see that all the responsibilities show the same upward trajectory during lockdown, with the additional burden of homeschooling and responsibilities that did not exist prior to lockdown. So you're seeing that the total amount of work that women were supposed to do, both inside their homes and at work, increased. How significant that was, we need to do the analysis, but at least the raw numbers show an increase. When officers were asked about their relationship with their line manager, whether they found their line manager to be supportive, whether they felt trusted, whether they had good communication with their line manager, and whether they felt appreciated, the numbers are fairly decent, I would say. So it does appear, even prior to COVID, that women officers felt well supported by their supervisors. These numbers kind of go down during COVID, but that can be partially probably explained by the fact that their line managers also had increasing stress, both at home. But that's something we need to explore further. In terms of their organizational support, we asked officers whether they received adequate PPE equipment. And I have a feeling these results might have been slightly affected by the fact that there were several lockdown periods. And although we were referring to the first lockdown period, over time, most police forces did manage to provide adequate PPE equipment. So over 3/4 felt that they had enough. What was really interesting is of those who did not agree with, so these are statements that respondents agreed with, 12% said PPE was not applicable for their role, and only 10% felt they had not received the PPE they should have. Similarly, 34% felt they did not need IT equipment as that was not relevant to their role. 23% felt that additional training, again, was not needed because the nature of their job had not changed. 16% felt that the requirement to make the workplace safer was not, again, relevant or applicable to their job. These are statements that need a little bit more unpicking, I think, in future studies. And again, very interestingly, 23% said they thought they did not need to be contacted by their line managers, and they didn't need inquiries about their well-being. So those are interesting statistics that need further unpacking. We did find that the level of stress experienced during COVID went up. So there were several sources of stress emanating from an increase in responsibilities, both in terms of care, as well as homeschooling and others, as we saw, resulting from increased workload and working conditions that were quite difficult because they were working as normal whilst the rest of the world was in lockdown. Stress emanating from a downturn in their relationship with supervisors, worry about health, their own health and their families, and specific stress associated with caring for mentally or physically disabled children. About 92 out of our sample of 265 officers said that they were looking after disabled children, which is quite a significant number. Without going into any details, just very, very superficially, if you look at the findings that have emerged from Kerala as compared to the findings from the Fleming and Brown study, in terms of household and caring responsibilities, fewer women in India reported being solely responsible for domestic chores. So that actually is indicative that women in India seem to have a lot more support from their spouses and from grandparents who help with looking after children. Since home working was not an option for for many women in Kerala, the lockdown did not really affect their working patterns and home arrangements significantly as compared to England. Most respondents in Kerala and those who did not work from home in England found that their working conditions were more stressful. So similarity between people who did not get the opportunity to work from home. And in other ways, there's quite a lot of similarity in the way in which women perceived how their organization responded to policing the pandemic. And they perceived this mainly as being quite positive. So they had a positive view about how the pandemic was policed. Some of the possible explanations for the differences and similarities. I think the first noticeable difference was the response to the two open-ended questions that we had. We asked people about describing briefly some of the new ways of working in the pandemic and whether they thought things would change going forward. Whereas our sample responded to these questions with probably a word or a phrase. Fleming and Brown found that their respondents wrote mini essays. So it obviously touched them a lot more. This might be due to the culture. I don't think in India, women respond to surveys that well. Also, maybe
about 2 more minutes.
Just organizational. Yeah, we'll wrap up. Difference in working conditions and attitude towards homework in Kerala is very different from how it was in England. Different cultural and familial expectations and lack of flexibility in the nature of work. I'll now quickly pass over to Dr. Sandhya to wrap up with the final 2 slides.
Thank you, Jyoti.
A couple of limitations, but we'll move on to reflecting on the status of women.
Reflecting on the status of women police, we do have a lot of positive points. Women police show more resilience. For example, we started a helpline, Prashanti, to help senior citizens and women living alone during COVID, manned only by women police. They were extremely dedicated solving problems of distressed citizens beyond call of duty in reaching out to the needy community. They did extraordinary service, distribution of medicine, mobilizing provisions, taking patients to hospitals, etc. This was very relevant in some of the districts where most of the youngsters are working abroad and aged parents are alone in their houses. This community engagement through working as beat officers helped them to handle this COVID specific situation so well. And the dedicated women working in Prashanti, I have personally seen their work was fantastic. Kudos to them. In a current study, we found 92 personnel looked after a child with mental or physical disability. I find this very, very disturbing. It requires urgent attention, and definitely in the coming Women in Police Kerala conference, we will be taking this up. And finally, when we come to implications of findings for policy, women police need special attention in providing care to the children and disabled at home. The time bank concept, which I have introduced recently in the fire and rescue service, can be thought of. Then women police need to be diversified further in their duties so that they are able to work in the telecom wing, which is not at all happening right now. So people will be able to take up their profession of interest, which will suit sometimes flexi timings also, and mentoring system, yoga, mindfulness practice, etc. would be helpful. Women police, including an IPS officer who were pregnant, were allowed to work from home during COVID-19 lockdown. This is only a qualitative finding. They found it very, very helpful when I interviewed them. So flexi timings concept could be very helpful, I feel. So we hope that better mechanisms to identify the mental and physical health conditions and providing appropriate support in needy times, that would be our priority in the coming times. And I would request Jyoti to conclude.
I think we've run out of time, but thank you very much.
And I just want to add that, all of these, the presentation is just a conversation starter. You will see much detailed explanation of this study. That's why we do the special issue, because the time is so less. So we are hoping that, we will see your paper soon and be able to read all about it. So we'll now move on to our second presentation, which is the Women in the Court System in India, focusing on lawyers, litigants, witnesses, and potential beneficiaries, co-presented by Dr. Sashikala Gurpur and Justice Dr. Shalini Phansalkar Joshi. You're on, and please share your screen.
Good afternoon or good morning over there, and good evening from India to Dr. Sheetal and all the esteemed panelists, and my co-panelist, Justice Dr. Shalini Phansalkar Joshi. A very warm welcome. Let me share the screen now. I hope my time starts now. Okay. Yeah, can you see there, all of you? I'm sure it's very clear to all of you. Let me put it in the slideshow mode.
If you want to put it on slideshow mode, Dr. Joshi, Dr. Gurpur.
Yeah, I shall.
Okay, perfect. You can go ahead.
After the discussion of one of the important links in the chain of justice administration system, which is the police force, we are going to focus on South Asian women in justice profession, particularly women in the court system in India, where we would like to unveil the idea of gender advocacy, where we look at lawyers, litigants, witnesses, and potential beneficiaries in women. And I'm very happy to come across as the Dean of Symbiosis Law School, Pune, and Faculty of Law, Symbiosis International University, which is home to 4 law schools, including ours, and supported and co-presented by our esteemed distinguished visiting professor and visiting judge in our Faculty of Law, Dr. Shalini Phansalkar Joshi, who is one of the eminent authors who has recently received a lot of accolades on her book on child abuse law, decoding child sexual abuse. So this is the little background. Now coming to the presentation, in the beginning, I would like to locate the ideas or concepts of gender advocacy and gender equality. We professors go very logically, and I'm sure the judge will bring a lot of life into this conversation, lest it goes academic. So our presentation has focused on ingredients of the court system in the form of women who are the stakeholders, who as the stakeholders are visible or invisible or partially visible in some places. So it's a kind of depiction of dots, we need to connect. So if you look at the chain of justice administration, gender transformative advocacy is what is required as per UNICEF. But are we having such transformative position is the question that we ask. If you look at the judiciary, on which our learned judge is going to present later on, the judiciary is fed by the bar, by the advocates, as far as the Indian system is concerned. So here we are not looking at advocacy only restricted to advocates who are registered after their law degree under Advocates Act of India. We are looking at advocacy as a kind of proposition which challenges power, which defends those who are powerless, and which facilitates participation equally across all the layers of justice system. So advocacy from that point of view is both advocacy from within the system and advocacy outside the system. So it's about negotiating power, it's about challenging power, it's about redefining power. So it's not just a rights-based kind of approach, it's about solving the problem to empower. So Doyle's concept, and then if you look at the way in which advocacy profession within the court is seen, with its, let us say, cognate, the medical profession. Women were always looked at choosing the medical profession even in the early days because it's very close to woman's gendered definition, which is about woman being a nurturing mother, a healing mom, or that they are decent. I mean, only decent women pursue medicine, this kind of a way. Or female doctor looking after children, or as a gynecologist, other women. We don't have such cognates in our profession because this argument was not available to aspiring women lawyers, because in any profession, the masculine and feminine is present. In our profession, it's more visible and it's more contested. So if you look at the idea of gender equality as the genders who are different, women who are different from men but deserve equality, they are entitled to equality, then maternity is the one which is highlighting the physical difference. Now, if we are talking about sameness and equality, then same type of work should entitle same type of wages, and same type of service should entitle them to same type of position. If you're looking at formal and essential equality, then all the processes of selection, etc., should be transparent. But if you look at women's situation in terms of equality, there is a substantive equality, there is a procedural equality. Both need not be neatly fitting into each other. And this applies to the cognates of gender equality in the form of transgender, or in the form of other vulnerable sections, or in case of women, compounding it further when they connect to these vulnerable sections or they belong to such vulnerable sections. So from this viewpoint, there is a need to look at women's position, women's role in its uniqueness. So if you look at our profession as feminization, I mean, how far is legal profession feminized? If you look at what Lohia called feminization of poverty, from that angle, if we see feminization of profession, which is a positive thing, we have 50% of working women in Finland, 10 to 20% working women only in Asia, of which 5% flat are in legal profession. Elsewhere in legal profession, if you look at, then the numbers are very huge, as we saw here. Therefore, if you look at the ethnography of legal profession in a court-centric manner, you would see that women are invisible, women's interaction is unequal, there is a gender stereotype, and there are hegemonic practices between men and women lawyers, men and women judges. There have been studies on this. There have been US studies coming from UC Hastings College of Law on work-life balance in legal profession. They showed how gender bias has got 4 important prevalent patterns. One is women have to prove it again. Even if they work equally well as men, that's not enough. They have to work twice hard to get half distance or half the level as far as men can go. Second concept is double blind. Women have to choose between being liked, being likable, and being respected. The two need not be neatly aligning with each other. Third is maternal walls. When women choose to become mothers, and as mothers, when because of the socio-cultural reasons, when they have to prioritize mothering role, they are assumed to be less serious, non-committed, or incompetent. And the last one is gender wars, where the women who do not mind the male gaze, or have incorporated or internalized that male gaze and have adapted to men's ways of looking at the world, are pleasing kind of one, which Deborah Road later calls that subtle sexism, that turns into conflict between women. So the stereotypes which are there in terms of women as well has resulted in either women assimilating this, or given difficult choices or constraints on their development. So if you look at women in this profession, either they belong to lawyer families. First generation women lawyers situation is very, very different. A lot of battles they have to fight. And there is exclusion of women from mainstream law practice, saying you're better off in family law, or a good-looking woman should be going to negotiate contracts with big companies. And denial, for example, criminal law or economic offenses to be dealt with woman is the last choice in a legal team. So if you look at the trajectory of women in legal profession, if you look at the first women lawyers, a comparative study of gender law in legal professions, what Mossman noted in the American context, how bar to the bench, the visibility is at stake, it is the same resonance in India. All these points which I discussed have a lot of resonances in India, which was very clear in the 2012 study of this Rainmaker group, where they showed how single women suffer, how glass ceiling makes many girls. I mean, in law schools, we have 60% girls because national merit exam only makes them to be cutting through all the merit criteria. But if you look at the profession, the percentage dwindles. That means there is a glass ceiling, and the mentoring is missed once she adapts to the mothering role when she wants to come back. And her absenteeism is considered as a non-professional automatically because of the infant. She may have to remain absent in between. That is viewed very insensitively and seriously. If I show this little video clipping, it will be very clear to you. The very first woman justice of a high court, late Justice Leela Seth, who was also part of the Verma committee, which revolutionized the criminal law report, she said how as a married woman and UK graduate, when she wanted to enter a law office to restart her legal profession, to start her second innings, I mean, as a mother, as a wife, she had invested many years when she wanted to start, how her lawyer boss told her that she should be looking after her husband well, her children well, and then there was so much of dissuading, but she persisted. And then after 20 years of her practice, she was appointed as a judge at Delhi High Court to be the first woman Chief Justice of a High Court. So the struggles are very, very difficult. Now, with this background in the picture, after first 6 minutes, I'm handing over the podium to Justice Shalini Pansalkar Joshi, who has had the distinction of being a woman judge who implemented the Justice Verma Committee report's criminal amendment law in a very, very courageous way by liberal interpretation to make the criminal law stringent for rape-related offenses, who will trace the footprints of Indian women in legal profession for over a century. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shashikala, for laying down the theoretical background and also making this platform available to me for talking on the most dear subject, that is the women's representation in the legal profession. As we can see, the discourse on gender advocacy cannot be complete unless without reference to the history of women advocates. And the history of women advocates is very, very struggling. I mean, if you see, now we find the law colleges bristling with young women, young female students, but just a century back, it was not so. And this fact is acknowledged by the Chief Justice of India, Ramanna, also in his address on the International Day for Women Judges in this year, just few days back. He has to say that legal profession still continues to be male dominated. And few years back, it was exclusively for male. As we can see from the story of Regina Guha, who was the first law graduate from West Bengal, her application for enrollment as an advocate or legal practitioner under the Legal Practitioners Act, which was being first of its kind, was placed before the full bench of Calcutta High Court, it came to be rejected. And that was on account of the narrow interpretation of the term person. Now, we readily accept the word person includes both male and female, but at that time, it was held that legislature never contemplated the admission of women in the ranks of legal profession. And therefore, her attempt to enter or to take admission, to admit in the impenetrable legal profession was unsuccessful. The same fate was meted out to Sudhanshu Bala also. She was from Patna. She has made application for enrollment under the Legal Practitioners Act in Patna High Court. And the full bench of Patna High Court has also rejected her application following the interpretation given in the case of Regina Guha. And both these decisions are finding place in the annals of legal journals. However, thereafter, the law was required to be amended in view of the Removal of Sex Disqualification Act of 1990. I mean, we will never imagine that sex can be considered as a disqualification, but that was removed. The Legal Practitioners Act was amended to include women therein. And now we had our first woman advocate, Cornelia Surabji, who was admitted as a pleader by the Allahabad High Court, but subject to conditions, subject to qualification that she cannot practice, litigate in the court. Her practice should be confined to the chamber only. But she was so, competent and so great that, she continued her practice of giving advice to the Pradhanishin woman, the other woman, making them aware of their legal rights. She was also known as an advocate of social reform, campaigning in particular for education of girls. Thereafter, we had this in Maharashtra, the distinction of being the first elite woman advocate goes to Mitha. She was admitted to argue cases and to be in litigation field in Bombay High Court. But if we know her story, and for years she has to wait for clients to come her way. And when one client came and she, out of curiosity, asked him how come he has approached her. And then he said that my solicitor, my attorney had told me that your case is so strong that anybody can win it. And therefore he wanted that his opponent should be defeated at the hands of a woman. And therefore he has come to her. That was the stage of affairs during those days. After waiting for years together, then she left the practice. She was appointed as Sheriff of Bombay, the first Indian woman to be conferred the post. And she has also distinction of becoming one of the first ever women to be called to the bar from Lincoln's Inn, as well as the first Indian woman to be to the bar in Britain. The point to emphasis is that she was in no way incompetent, but her competence as a legal profession was not recognized because legal profession was not ready to accept her. Thereafter, the things have little bit changed. Now we are having Indira Jaising as the first woman to be designated as senior advocate by the Bombay High Court, the first Indian woman to be elected to the United Nations Committee on CEDAW, and she is noted for her legal activism, advocacy in promoting human rights causes. However, the fact remains that till today, the women advocates are not finding place at the top position in the legal profession. We will find very few women designated as senior counsels. As we can see that there are only 17 women designated as senior counsels in 2019, 8 in Delhi High Court in 2017, and 6 in Bombay High Court in 2015. So their proportion, their percentage gives the reality as to how the things are so difficult for women to still reach to the top. Their struggle is within the profession also. And we can see that even in the bar councils of India, the representation is only 2.4. There is 2.4%. There is hardly any woman occupying the position of president, vice president, or position of decision maker in several of the bar councils and Indian bar council, in Bar Council of India also. So many state bar councils are not having any woman representation so far. The reasons may be several, as we can discuss afterwards: the family pressure, then gender discrimination, and so many other aspects of the same. One of the first women bar council president in Agra was shot in. This to that extent, the things are happening till now. Now, women as litigants. May I continue? Or you would like to take it over?
I'll take over for a little while. I'll take over. Then maybe I will bring you to narrate the stories.
Please go ahead.
So thank you, ma'am. And if we are looking at women as litigants, we have National Judicial Data Grid, which shows in civil litigation, the percentage of cases filed by women is only 16%, and criminal litigation it is 6.2%, and overall 8.8%. Whereas women's real statistics in the national demography is 50% almost. So if you look at this carefully, do we mean to say that there are only this many women who are aggrieved? Not true. It is that just a female victim may not be able to take action because she is not empowered. So it's a disuse of the law. On the other hand, if you look at the all women's code, there are peer mediators who suggest solutions, etc. So this all women's code is something that needs to be a reality. On the other hand, in the National Crime Statistics Bureau, if you look at offenses against women, the highest number of offenses are the acts of violence committed by husband and relatives. So for women, home itself is not a safe space, and most of the offenses are around the institution of marriage. And there is a cry all the time going out loudly by male legislators and law commission members that the law is being misused by women. How do we account for the disuse of this law? Many women who are undergoing silent pain and do not file cases because there are children, or because they don't have means of life, or they are not skilled enough, or they do not have so much of moral or psychological strength to go ahead as a single people in the society. So National Crime Statistics Bureau is talking about this kind of statistics where cruelty by husband or his relatives is 30%, and kidnapping and abduction of women 16.8%, rape is 7.5%, and outraging modesty, which is again an ambiguous category, which was again explained in the Criminal Law Amendment Act in 2013, shows about 23%. So if you look at per lakh women population, it's 56.5 numbers are given against 62.3 in 2009. Do we mean to say that India has become safe as far as crime against women is concerned, or women are concerned? Somewhere something is amiss, which needs a lot of analysis. So if you look at the courts, in the courts, there are these very unhappy incidents which have been reported, where a rape complainant was laughed at by a sessions judge during the hearing. She wrote to then Chief Justice of India, Justice Bobde, about such casual sexism by the judges. And the Internal Complaints Committee, which is a mandatory requirement under Prevention of Sexual Harassment Against Women case, has been very slowly adopted in the Supreme Court after a couple of incidents. And then this now has been, and I request Dr. Shalini to intervene here. Ma'am, you are muted, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. So we are having made certain progress because women come to the court either to seek justice for themselves, or they are being dragged to the courts by their husbands or someone, so majority of their litigation is in the matrimonial field, and there or in sexual violence and gender-based violence constitute such a major challenge that for these women, we are initiating, several schemes like Manodhairya, where they have been paid immediate compensation, interim compensation for their rehabilitation, for the injury which they have suffered. We are also having the survivor-centric justice administration in the form of one-stop crisis center. This is a unique idea where under 400 and 704 one-stop centers are established in the country, where under one roof, the woman who is subjected to any sort of violence, whether sexual, domestic, or whosoever come to the police, is given all the services like help desk for police, legal, medical, counseling, service to the victims of violence, and with integrated helpline. So that is really a wonderful experience for these women who are really in need of the same immediate shelter is provided to them. And then we can also discuss about Karnataka Judicial Academy special training by female sex workers. Yes, Dr. Shashikala, you are much aware.
So let me share with this August gathering two important experiences have been
Okay, just wanted to remind you, we have about a minute more. I want to make sure everyone has time. Okay,
just give me a minute and quickly wrap up. So this experience is about how journalists and help desks and technology and service providers can collaborate. This was a public trial which was conducted in collaboration with Vimochana, with the retired judges, which opened up many cases of unnatural death registers. And this resulted in a kind of justice to dowry victims in those days in 1998. And then we had another experience where female sex worker union were co-opted by a retired judge to teach the judges who otherwise would indulge in delaying access or delaying hearing for the whole day for these female sex workers. So in the conclusion, we would like to highlight what is the way forward to transformation, which we began with in our beginning from UNICEF. One is that legal practitioners should break stereotype and get empowered. So from that point of view, legal profession is the best profession for women with a strong professional identity. However, it's not easy, as we highlighted. Justice Hima Kohli from the Supreme Court, when she was High Court Justice, she said that we have swung the pendulum the other way. We have come a long way. We have to negotiate between our identity and profession in a strong manner. We need to subvert the myth. We have to look at gender constructed social difference to be transformed. So it is here that we link the sustainable development goals in terms of goal 2, which is looking at zero hunger, goal 5, most important, gender equality, with many indicators, of which rights become important indicator, and access to justice as one of the facets of that. And the 16th one on peace and justice, the 13th one on the environmental dimension. Courts have to become more women friendly, with the toilets, and even the judges and other women personnel within the court to be viewed with right and with the biological differences, what we call as equal but different kind of treatment, which needs to be highlighted in the court management and court administration as well. And it has to be going beyond the patriarchal milieu in terms of trying to better the lives of women at all levels. So we give you the advocacy program looking at gender aware, gender responsive, and gender transformative approach in terms of gender budgeting in the police, in the system, in the institutions, in the community, interpersonal way, and individually, so that they engage equally in every process of justice administration system. Ma'am, I would request you to give the last line in terms of wrapping up, and I thank the panel.
Thank you, Dr. Shashikala. Just to say that women in legal profession have come long way, but there is still a long way to go also, and which way may not be strewn with roses, but it may be strewn with thorns also, as we can see in our further discussion. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, both of you. Actually, I have to tell you, I'm finding it so difficult to keep track of time because I'm getting carried away by the conversations thus far. So it's very difficult, I have to tell you. This is one of my hardest timekeeping jobs. I'm missing my colleague, Don Beekner, who's fantastic at that. So with that, we'll move on to the third presentation of the day. I just look forward to reading all these papers and seeing them written and published. So the third topic is also about women in the court system in India, but from a judicial perspective. And that's going to be very interesting to hear from Justice Geeta Mitha, who was former Chief Justice of the Jammu and Kashmir High Court, along with Professor Deepika Jain, who is Professor of Law at the Jindal Global Law School. She, of course, runs and manages many centers and details. Everyone's biography, actually, the titles alone are mini biographies, and then there are biographies. So I'll just share it. I had mentioned I'll share it, but I'll share it in chat right now. I don't know if it goes to everyone, so I'll probably ask our media specialist to make the biography PDF available to everyone. So please go ahead, Justice Mittal and Professor Deepika Jain.
Namaskar. Good morning, good evening, and a good day to the panelists, to Dr. Sheetal Ranjan, to everybody who's watching this program. My very grateful thanks from the bottom of my heart on behalf of Deepika and myself to the organizers of this wonderful program, exploring the sustainable development goals from the perspective of ensuring equality, to women in different areas and different facets of their lives. Christabel Pankhurst had said, ability is sexless, but yet it is not looked at when we look at the way we look at the perspective, gender perspectives in the legal profession and the judiciary. A very strong reiteration of the importance of equality, especially in the justice arena, is brought to the fore and in fact reinforced by the 26th April 2021 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly, which reaffirmed the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals, when it said that gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls will make a crucial contribution to progress across all SDGs and targets, and that systematic mainstreaming of a gender perspective in the implementation of the 2030 agenda is crucial. This General Assembly also noted that a relatively small number of women had been judges, including senior judicial leadership at all levels. And what Deepika and I will endeavor to establish before you is how it has panned out in reality in India. Also, the UN General Assembly has reaffirmed that active participation of women on equal terms with men at all levels of decision making is essential to the achievement of equality, sustainable development, peace, as well as democracy. And then the General Assembly proclaimed the 10th of March of each year as the International Day of Women Judges. Such a tremendous recognition of the importance of ensuring equality in judicial appointments and the judiciary. Certainly in the legal profession as well, which provides the source from which judges in India and in other parts of the world are appointed. We are going to look at the topic under discussion from three perspectives. We are looking at, we divided our discussion today into three areas. One is the lack of gender diversity in India, the gendered issues of judicial appointments, and Deepika is going to make this a strong argument about the feminist approach towards gender equality. I've just mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, and Shashikala ji and Shalini ji have dealt with it in great length in the previous discussion. But some essential facts about India: a population of 1.38 billion, the country is divided into 28 states and 8 union territories with 25 high courts, total number of judges in high courts 660. When you look at the hierarchy of courts, you have the top down, you have the Supreme Court of India, the high courts of the states. These two are constitutional courts. And at the district court level, you have civil judges and magistrates at the bottom of the totem pole and district judges above them. The process of judicial appointments. Now, again, this we are talking of so far as the constitutional courts are concerned, the appointment is by the President of India in consultation with the Chief Justice of India and few others. To qualify as judges, minimum level of legal practice as well as or experience as a judge is essential. So far as trial court judges are concerned, there is a mandatory examination and an interview process, a more objective form of appointment. Statistics on women lawyers and judges, I think Shashikala ji has dealt with it at length, but I would just like to reiterate, she has pointed out that 60% of law students are entering, all students who are entering law colleges are female. But however, the participation in India's judiciary has increased very slowly, rising from 5.4% to 7.65% in 2005. This was from 1985 to 2005. The number of judges in the subordinate judiciary was 27% in 2020. In women judges in the high courts, it's only 11% of the total judge strength. Women office bearers of Bar Council of India, nil, as was pointed out by Justice Joshi. In 2013, only 52 out of 642 high court judges were women. As of 2013, the maximum number of women judges in any high court is only 9. In 2019, only 76 women judges in 25 high courts across the country, which is barely 7% against the sanctioned strength. In September 2020, there are at least 5 states, you can see on the slide, which have no women judges. In the subordinate courts, 1 in 3 judges is a woman. In Bihar, Gujarat, and Jharkhand, very big states in terms of area, they have less than 20% of women judges out of the total strength. In the high courts, only 1 state has a percentage higher than 20%. So 1 in 9 judges in the high courts is a woman. The Supreme Court, however, reads differently. Only 4.2% of the total judges appointed since the independence of India have been women. The total number of 11 women have been appointed to the Supreme Court out of the 256 judges in total. We currently have the highest representation of women judges in the Supreme Court, which is 11%. But very noteworthy, no Registrar General or Secretary General of the Supreme Court of India has ever been a woman. Out of 78 former registrars, only 5 have been women. Out of 14 registrars, only 1 is a woman. This runs even into the appointments given to women once they become judges. We also need to look at gender diversity holistically. In India, there is a very deeply entrenched caste system. Dalits form part of what are called the scheduled castes. No Dalit woman judge has ever been appointed to the Supreme Court of India. No indigenous woman judge has reached the Supreme Court of India. We have never had a transgender or gender diverse judge in the Supreme Court of India. This is extremely critical given the expansionist jurisprudence which has come from the Supreme Court of India in what was in the judgment recognizing transgender rights, which is known as the Nalsa judgment, and the judgment recognizing the decriminalizing homosexuality in India, which was earlier criminalized, wherein the rights of the LGBTQ community have been recognized. So despite these judgments, powerful judgments, we have not been able to transgress or the limitations, and we've not been able to make appointments, judicial appointments of transgender or gender diverse judges. It is also interesting that the Constitution of India uses the word sex and does not use the word gender. So this is another interesting area where we can have a huge discourse, but for want of time, we are not going to get into it today. But here are some women who have broken the glass ceiling. The first woman judge of the Supreme Court came in 1989 after decades and decades of wait. The first woman judge appointed to the High Court was in 1959, Justice Anna Chandi. The first woman judge of Delhi High Court was Justice Leela Seth, who in 1991 also became the first woman Chief Justice of the High Court of of Himachal Pradesh. Interestingly, you'd be surprised to know that in Jammu and Kashmir, the first woman judge, High Court of Jammu and Kashmir, the first woman judge to be appointed was in 2018, and I was the first woman Chief Justice of the state appointed in 2018 as well. Now, another interesting figure, which is very, very pertinent as to why we are not able to achieve equality in judicial appointments, is that women have hardly any role in the decision-making collegiums and collective selection panels. Women, so far as appointment to the Supreme Court of India are concerned, have mostly been appointed when they're either close to 60 or 62 years of age. That is when they're at the verge of retirement from the high courts to which they were originally appointed. We have a retirement age of a Supreme Court judge at 65 years. Now, this slide shows you that most of the women who have gone to the Supreme Court have been appointed at post 60, which gives them very few years of judgeship in the Supreme Court. And certainly they do not make it to the collegium because they're not in the Supreme Court long enough. The longest tenure of a woman judge was that of Justice Ruma Pal, who was appointed at 58 years in 2000 and retired in 2007, giving her 7 years. And she did make it to the collegium. So this is another critical area which is very important as to why there is not enough attention given to appointment of women judges to constitutional courts. Now, let us briefly examine the gendered issues of judicial appointments in India. Is there a bias in judicial appointments? Now, this is what Indira Jaising, the first woman Additional Solicitor General of India, said. You heard Justice Joshi mention her, and this is what she said. Quite apart from the fact that no basis for assessment of merit is spelled out for women to be serious contenders, they must be of outstanding merit to be equal to men, unquote. I add to this, the women must not be of only outstanding merit to be equal to men, but they must be of outstanding merit to be equal to very ordinary men. So, you know, the standards which are against which women's merit is weighed are very different from the standards against which men are weighed. Men's merit is weighed. And also, you know, if you're making appointments of women judges from the trial courts for appointment to the constitutional courts is concerned, you know, they face a double negative prejudice. You see, there is no objective standard for assessing their merit, the merit of their judgments, etc. On the contrary, if they happen to have been on leave for some period of time, say on grounds of pregnancy or maternity leave, it is perceived that they have failed to deliver sufficient number of judgments in that particular year, or they were unnecessarily on leave, which is taken as against them while evaluating their merit. Why should you have bench gender diversity? Very, very critical. Women form 50% of the population. So for courts to be representative of society, it is essential to have women on the bench. It is also essential to have women because they're symbols of the ideal of equality. Women are an extremely valuable source, human and intellectual resource capable of multitasking. This is scientifically accepted as well. There would be a perception of fairness in the community, in the litigants, in the bar, if more women were on the bench. There would be wider range of considerations because even Benjamin Cardozo, the wonderful judge from the United States Supreme Court, said that we all bring our experiences with us. They're part of us even when we are judges. So the women's experiences, because of her gender position and responsibilities, would be showcased in her decision making and make it more sensitive. The presence of women in the judiciary makes it less intimidating to almost half or more of the population. That is, the women who are litigating in court. So it is therefore extremely important that we look at ensuring gender equality in the judiciary. Justice Mary Jean Cohen, Chief Justice of Minnesota Supreme Court, had stated, and I quote, "A wise old woman and a wise old man reach exactly the same conclusion." So women have qualifications and experiences equal to or more than men, yet do not have access to judicial positions. Recruiting and nomination services are gender biased. There is a dearth of female role models to demonstrate women's capacity and capability as judges. Also, if there is a need for transfer from one place to another, male judges' families are more likely to be able to follow them if they are transferred. Female judges have limited options, and this also works against women's joining the judicial appointments and positions. What is the justice case for women in the judiciary? We lack an objective and systematic analysis of judgments by women judges and their impact on society in general, not only on gender justice. And therefore, we do not have enough material to evaluate the work of and contribution of the women judiciary. Now, this is what was mentioned by my previous speakers, but is very important, the phenomenon of adverse incorporation. Even when women are appointed to the bench, gender stereotypes influence the assignments or roster allocations of women judges. Women judges will be perceived as good enough for family courts, guardianship courts, and it will be difficult for the Chief Justice to think of assigning them corporate jurisdiction, contract jurisdiction, property jurisdictions. There is an inherent bias against the women's abilities to discharge these works timely. Then also when they are included on committees, they are given the less important ones or the more precarious positions. For instance, a woman judge will be assigned to a library committee, the protocol duties committees, hospitality committee, etc. This is the Glass-Cliff syndrome. There are barriers in the process of appointment. There's a strong influence of selectors, usually male gender bias, which I pointed out. You don't have women reaching positions in the collegium to ensure gender equality. there is a gender bias, there is a complete lack of objective selection criteria for judicial appointments to higher courts. There is no criteria prescribed for actually appointment to the constitutional courts. There is no public hearing, etc. And there is no method of assessing judgments or contribution to judicial work, to administrative work, to institutional development. And there's an absolutely arbitrary system for making appointments to the highest courts. And there is lack of transparency. So is there a glass ceiling? Certainly there is. And how many women are able to impregnate it? I always say that you break the glass ceiling, not when you have achieved the position, but when you're able to take others who don't have the same opportunity as you, who are lesser placed, who are marginalized into higher positions. I have run out of what I had to, we had split our time between Deepika and me. And I think I am going to stop here and request Deepika to speak about the feminist approach towards gender equality here.
Good morning and good evening to all. Thank you so much, Professor Ranjan, for having me on this very distinguished panel. Continuing from where Justice Mitha left, I will be looking at two dominant feminist approaches and feminist legal theory arguments for increasing judicial diversity on the bench. The first one is the difference theory, and the second one is the equality theory. I will also subsequently bring in the critique for these theories and how those are relevant to the Indian context. So as far as the difference theory is concerned, according to the feminist scholars like Carol Gilligan, who are basically the founders of a difference theory, they state that difference theory asserts that there is a fundamental difference between the way men and women engage, relate, and make meanings of the world. In the context of judiciary, this has led to arguments that women bring a feminine perspective to judging, that women bring an ethic of care to the issue of justice, distinct to that of a largely right-based approach of men. Now, while the difference argument is very strong, as it provides a strong claim for participation of women in the judiciary, there are some feminist critiques of this argument. Scholars have argued that difference theory, if applied, can be a double-edged sword, capable of being used in a way that can support or subvert feminist goals. Historically, women's difference have been used as a justification to exclude them from public life. It is therefore important to recognize that such an argument of difference can reinforce stereotypes around gender roles of women. Further, this theory also homogenizes the category of women, arguing that all women are different from men, thereby creating a neat binary between men and women. We know that women face oppression differently depending on their caste, race, and religion. These rungs of social justice, social locations must be accounted for to ensure holistic representation, as Justice Geeta Mittal had suggested in the first part of the presentation, because otherwise only one kind of woman will be represented, thereby ignoring the social realities of women facing multiple forms of oppression. For example, all the women judges in the Supreme Court of India so far, which are 11 in number, have had some kind of caste privilege and have been cisgendered, except 2 judges that came from minority backgrounds. Therefore, the more persuasive argument for judicial diversity is couched in terms of equality and representation argument, rather than the difference argument, which I will elaborate on. Equality theory emerges from the liberal perspective of equal opportunity, contending that women have an equal opportunity to participate in public decision-making, and their absence undermines the democratic legitimacy of these bodies. This theory further argues that legal institutions that incorporate women are more objective, since it equally reflects women's rather than primarily men's experiences. Also, women representation in the judiciary can also lead to a more gender-sensitive judgment. Let me give you an example, a very recent example. In 2018, an all-women bench of the Supreme Court of India in a rape case titled State versus Pankaj Chaudhary argued that even if the victim was habituated to sexual intercourse, it could not be inferred that she was a woman of loose moral character, and that even if the prosecutrix was of easy virtue, she had the right to refuse to submit herself to sexual intercourse. In contrast, an all-men bench in 2016 from the same court opined in a case with similar facts and circumstances. The case is called Raja versus State of Karnataka, that the victim was accustomed to sexual intercourse. They said that in the legal reasoning, and therefore her testimonial was not believable. So equality theory also states that there will be creation of gender inclusive structures and judicial processes by virtue of more women joining. For example, I'm going to take a Justice Geeta Mittal's example. Justice Geeta Mittal was the chairperson of committee that designed the Vulnerable Witness Project, which ensured that witness would not have to face the accused and could share the testimony in a comfortable and confidential spaces. So while there are these arguments about gender equality within the judicial spaces, there are also critiques who argue that representation of women judges on the bench is not a guarantee of feminist judgment or outlook, because gender is not a proxy for feminist. So Rosalind Dixon, who's a professor of law in Sydney, critiques the orthodox feminist outlook and states that a feminist judge is better than a woman judge if the goal of the judiciary is sensitive and feminist and provides for feminist legal reasoning. So I think it's important to then ask if identity representation by itself is emancipatory, and if there are limitations to identity politics. However, equality theory by itself begs this question: why must we make arguments for inclusion, including a certain segment of population that is underrepresented, when they have an inalienable democratic right to equal opportunity? The burden of liberatory politics does not have to fall on women itself. Even if women do not contribute to creating a gender inclusive workspace or make gender sensitive judgments, or caste oppressed women do not render judgments in favor of anti-caste politics, does that mean that they do not have the right to be part of the judiciary? It's an important question that we are deliberating and engaging in our paper. Thank you.
I mean, this is brilliant. I mean, thank you so much. Geeta ji, did you want to say a couple of words? I just want to make sure I give time to the next panelist, and we'll have about 15 minutes, I think, in the end, or even 10 minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a minute to conclude. This is just a summation of what Deepika and I have concluded. The most important thing which is necessary to ensure equality in judicial appointments is to lay down and enforce an absolutely transparent and objective criteria for appointment, whereby every aspect of the judge's work, male and female, is evaluated: judicial, administrative, and institutional development. Secondly, there must be a fair method for evaluating women's work, which is absolutely non-existent. And thirdly and lastly, very, very critical, we must create an enabling environment at work at the legal professional level. This would include, for instance, creches needed for your staff members, needed for lawyers, not only for women judges, but also for male judges who are working spouses. It includes childcare, child feeding rooms. It includes flexi timings. It includes accommodating women's special needs. For instance, a woman who's a caregiver for a disabled mother-in-law, not even a mother. So, we must make allowances and ensure that when we create administrative rules for evaluating women's work, women judges' work, we must ensure that we have created an enabling environment for women, placed at any level, at every level, and recognizing every possible contingency. Thank you very much, Sheetal. I speak for Deepika and myself.
Oh, thank you so much. This is brilliant. I'm telling you, it's been very hard for me to keep time, because I'm caught up when I'm engaged with you folks that I'm not able to actually keep good time. But we'll move on to the to the last presentation. And I think we've lost a lot of time on our Q&A, but we'll try and answer as best as we can towards the end. So we have women's experiences navigating prisons in India from a social work perspective. Presented by Dr. Penelope Tong, Social Work and Fieldwork Supervisor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, who will co-present it along with Ms. Natasha Bhardwaj, who is, founder of the South Asian Institute of Crime and Justice Studies, but also doctoral candidate at Rutgers School of Criminal Justice. I just want to add a note here that we have representation from some of the top institutions in India over here, and I'm super proud about that. We have Jindal, JGU, we have Symbiosis, we have the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and of course, all the other organizations that you represent. So I'm pretty impressed with that. And I look forward, and I'm just, the nuanced discussions are so thrilling. And I'm looking forward to your presentation, Natasha and Penny. On to you now. 20 minutes, I'll give you a 15-minute reminder, and hopefully we'll have time saved for questions. Thank you.
Okay, super. So thank you so much. I'm going to actually begin. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I just want to give a big shout out. Dr. Tong was my first fieldwork supervisor. So a lot of my work that ended up happening was because of under her guidance. Today we're going to talk about women's experiences navigating prisons in two ways. I look at it from a research perspective, and then Dr. Tong's going to set up the thing to really understand how prisons in India have a social work anchoring in them. So I'm just going to go right into it rather than going into an overview. So just if you look at like, what do we know about women in prisons, right? There's like globally around 700,000, more than 700,000 women in penal institutions. This could be either like remanded or convicted, right? We know that these women come from usually low socioeconomic status. Their lives are characterized by trauma, abuse, serious mental illness, lots of issues with like self-medication as a means of coping, right? A lot of women have very intricate and like histories of victimization. This could be intimate partner violence. This could be in the homes they grew up. Among this, something very important to know is that India actually has the 6th highest number of women in prison in the world, right? So that's literally why we need to kind of talk about India, right? If you look at a lot of the theories that we read, a lot of the research is still anchored on and focuses on men. And even within that, it actually just looks at questions in contexts that are set in the global north, in America. So we have very less knowledge about what's going on in India and even the South Asian context, right? So really furthering this kind of sustainable development goals towards gender equality, peace, and justice, we need to build context-specific understandings of this issue as it exists. So what are the life course and women's pathways to incarceration tell us, right? This is historically where we've been studying it. You see a lot of feminist scholars are talking about a pathways approach that basically help us understand that how there's an overlap between race, class, gender that increases a women's risk of offending and then subsequent incarceration, right? And then if you're looking at this pathways, there's also the idea of understanding that gender neutral risks are associated with criminal offending for men and women. So whether that's the people they associate with in terms of their peer networks, steady housing. And I think most importantly, even though we know a lot of these things exist globally, there's a huge socio-cultural, economic, and political difference that exists between the West and the non-Western kind of countries that we talk about, right? So these studies that are set in the West really plays a good means for us to research what's going on, but we have to build context-specific understandings, right? So I know a lot of the other panelists also talk, but just as a snapshot, India is 1.37 billion people. The religious breakup of people who identified with certain categories, Hindus were 80%, Muslims. This is the 2011 census, right? So based on this, and really, I think kind of the growing but dearth of research is basically where my study that I'm going to talk about next, and that will lead up to why we're really important to continue to anchor ourselves in social work perspectives. But before that, I want to actually go over this slide, which tells us a little bit about the National Crime Report, which basically tells us that as of 2020, end of 2020, there were 488,000 people who were in prison. So this includes convicted and under trial. Men overwhelmingly make up 95.8% of this, but 4% of that, which is 20,000, are women. And then we have 70 people who identified as transgender, right? Among this, you can see majority of it is 76% is under trial prisoners and 23% is convicted, right? So I think also a significant thing to note is from 2019 to 2020, the under trial population saw an increase of 11%, right? And of course, there's different reasons why this ended up happening. And then you have trial. The important thing to see with women is that there were 1,184 under trial women who had 1,345 children with them in prisons, right? And then you had 214 of this whole number, which was just women who were convicted, and 246 children. Now look at these numbers, and then you can look at it that we had 61,000 jail staff within it. And within that, 13% is what it constitutes women jail officers, staff, and medical officers, right? So you're looking at this really diverse makeup. You can see that women make up 4% of the population and how this is handled. So what does theory tell us? That basically a lot of these women are ending up in prison because of class, caste, religion, and the rural-urban divide, right? One of the things that we've seen historically is that women in India end up in prison for dowry-related offenses, violent crimes, and their offending is embedded in the limited roles that they have in their family structures. So if you look at it, Cherkuri et al. Was like a study in 2009. They found 4 important factors that shape Indian women's paths to prison: the practice of dowry, spousal abuse, patriarchal household nature, and economic marginality, right? So there's a big intersection of class and caste that plays out in why women end up in prison. So to really kind of elaborate on this, I started to also wanted to build on this, and I did this study as part of my dissertation, which is 85 women I interviewed in 3 prisons using life event calendars and narrative life history interviews. Now, what did I find? Literally what's been found in the past, but just that, again, among the all the women, 85, 67 of them were incarcerated for violent offenses. Overwhelmingly, you saw a lot of dowry-related offenses. And again, I sampled across 3 prisons to really reflect the religious diversity that's reflected in our population. Now, I think more than anything else, what's overwhelming in all of these women's histories are their victimization histories, right? The need for interventions which have to be anchored in social work perspectives, right? So you see that these women are really embedded in their families. So almost like gender acts like a pathway to prison, right? As a facilitator, that they're so gendered in the roles, whether that's the work they do or the kind of roles they can play. And you'll see a lot of it in the histories that I talk about these women, that it's either as a wife, as a daughter-in-law. So leading us into why we need to reach out to these women and, how we need to kind of tend to their needs. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Dawn for that.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So a very good morning, afternoon and evening to everybody present here. I'm really excited about being here and feel very honored to be on this panel. So I am very thankful to Dr. Ranjan for this opportunity. So today I speak as a social worker, a category of professionals that has not been considered for their role in justice work. And for this reason, social workers are not inherently on prison or justice structures. I represent an organization, an entity called Prayas, which is a field action project of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Prayas, which means effort in Hindi, was the brainchild of Dr. Sanobar Sahni and was the outcome of her doctoral thesis on women under trial prisoners in Mumbai. Prayas has completed 32 years in the field as a non-governmental body. And through this period, they have been able to introduce, demonstrate, and start to establish social work in prisons through their direct services, as well as through affecting procedure and policy. So today I would like to focus on 3 broad areas because I feel that they're all interlinked. I'd like to look at women as prisoners. I'd like to look at social work in prison. And I'd like to look at women as social work professionals in prison. Okay. So why do we need to reach out to women prisoners? When we look back, the past 40 years has been particularly empowering for women, as action by women has enabled the recognition, the acknowledgement, and a response to women's victimization from crime. However, there are a number of women whose experiences and journeys have led them into crime, and these women have not yet been brought into the fold, despite very strong gender factors that have dominated their lives. So when I speak of women prisoners, I speak of women who have left home at an early age due to being discriminated against for being girls, due to forced marriages, due to wanting to fulfill non-stereotypical dreams, but have ended up in situations of exploitation and abuse. I speak of women who've not had the opportunity for education and for developing livelihood skills, and who have come in contact with a very promising illegal sector. I speak of women who have been victims of domestic violence for years and have now come into prison for the murders of their husbands. Women who have suffered with mental illness women who have suffered with mental illness and who have come into prison for offenses as petty as traveling in public transport without being able to pay for it. Of course, there's also been theft by women with mental illness and the more serious offenses of murders of their children and other family members. I also refer to women who have been trafficked as young girls and are now in prison for trafficking other women. And as Natasha has also mentioned, I speak of women who have been limited to domestic spaces, to prevailing power structures, who have imbibed patriarchal and gender biases and now perpetrate them on other women, as we see often in dowry-related harassment and dowry deaths. We'll go to our next slide, Natasha. Yeah. Why is social work critical to the fulfillment of justice goals for women? Now, as social workers, when we entered prison, I remember taking in 3 strong messages and 3 strong positions. One of them was that our prison departments need to transition from a retributive mindset to a rehabilitation or a social justice mindset. This is one of the things that we took in as social workers. Secondly, when we look at prison durations, often this time, whether it is for an under trial or a convicted person, this time is often seen as detached from pre-prison or post-prison lives of incarcerated populations. Now, this is very important because prison and the term spent in prison cannot be seen as independent. We need to see them as interlinked. Thirdly, women who come into prison often come in with histories of disadvantage. There have been exclusionary processes that they've already gone through, and prison is often, one of the last points. Incarceration intensifies this disadvantage, especially when there is no intervention. Now, for prison and for the prison administration, it was very difficult to understand social work. The social work approach for them was unfamiliar. It gave undue attention to prisoners' needs and was seen as ineffective because it did not produce immediate results. In the course of working with women in prison, because we were working as a non-governmental entity, we were able to function out of the rigidities and the hierarchies that characterize prison structures and interactions. And I'd like to share with you a little bit about some of the things that we've realized about women prisoners. So many women prisoners, due to their educational disadvantage, were unable to understand legal procedure, understand legal aid, understand legal remedy. It was very important for us to reach first-time entrants, women prisoners, because that was a turning point in their lives. Women who were without family support were at a heightened risk for further criminalization and victimization. Children who were left outside, although invisible, were very important to reach. Women, when having to re-enter post-prison, re-entry to society post-prison, faced many more challenges than their male counterparts, and that intervening in the psychosocial and economic realities of women could decrease the extent of marginalization and exclusion. Now, while it took a while for prison administration to realize this, over a period of time, over a period of time, over a period of time, we were able to communicate that social work had the scope for facilitating reconnection with women's families. It could maintain and sustain contact with children. It could help keep children within the education system. It could help generate training and livelihood opportunities for women, and it could bring women's issues before justice structures. So today, while our prisons are still very heavily burdened with large numbers and are restricted and almost stuck within a custodian role, today they are able to relate formally and informally with the social work role and its scope, especially in the case of women and populations who are most marginalized and vulnerable. I'd like to end with looking at what it is that has facilitated women in this journey as professionals in prison. One thing for sure that enabled entry into prison for women as social workers was the fact that women existed as prisoners. So 32 years ago, when we started work in prison, there were 3 caretaking staff who were women among the total prison administration and staff in the prison that we entered at the beginning. There was no other woman on the prison administration. For women, we found that it was much easier for women to relate to women professionals, whether it was on the prison administration or as social workers. Of course, we were in a minority. We were very conspicuous, and we did require to take that additional step in order to fit in order to adhere to cultural norms, in order to be able to relate to a male-dominated structure. And I remember as a young social worker, wearing a sari was a voluntary, non-negotiable when entering prison. And this was what we were required to do in order to fit in, even though it took 45 minutes to drape at the beginning of each day. But at the end of it all, women continuing to focus on a strong professional identity, this was mentioned by one of the panelists prior to this as well, was very important because that helped relate as a professional. We also had the advantage of having a good support system within the organization where women could come and share their experiences, discuss, and come back to the system with a renewed energy to be able to deal with any kind of patriarchal or paternalistic attitudes that we were faced with. So today, of course, things have changed. There are many more women staff in prison. This does serve for increasing the gender neutrality in prison, for creating a more conducive environment for more women to think of prison careers. Though there's still a long way to go, as Justice Shalini Phansalkar said. We have still only a 13.67% of prison staff who are women. But having said this, we have moved, and I think it gives us certainly a lot of hope to carry on as we continue to strive as women justice professionals. Thank you so much.
Super. I think, and that wraps up our presentation. Thank you. And also I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Ranjan for giving us this opportunity to collaborate in this way. So really, thank you so much.
Oh, I mean, the greatest joy of doing this work, in fact, one of the things when the CSW team, Dr. Barbara, Dr. Bickner and I, like, what do we write this time in our special issue forward? I think what we need to write about is the joy that this work gives us of bringing people together, people who would not typically have worked. I know we impose heavy, harsh deadlines, we push for high quality, we do all of those things, but at the end, the result that we see is truly phenomenal, and we begin to believe in this so much. And so we really enjoy the pairing of, an academic with a practitioner is simply phenomenal. So with this, I pass on the Q&A session to my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Vanessa Michaelson. I call her Venice, but all yours, please.
All right, thank you so much for including me in this. It's just such an incredible group of people doing amazing work. So I'm quite honored to be a part of this. We have one question in the Q&A. I'd like first to encourage people, including panelists, to add any questions into the Q&A. If you have anything you wanted to ask, Dr. Mona Danner has asked a question for Justice Geeta Mittal, she noticed that the most women were appointed as judges just before the age of retirement. And she was wondering whether that was the same both for men and for women. So basically women had almost no time at the end of their careers, and if that's the same for men and for women.
No, it's not. Certainly men get a longer tenure because they get to preside over division benches, they get to reach the collegium, at any point of time other than when Justice Ruma Pal was on the bench. There have never been any women in the collegium. I think Deepika will do the research on this and corroborate whether I'm correct or not. But it makes a huge difference, So there have been times when there have been only one woman Chief Justice or two women Chief Justice in the country, and neither of them has been taken to the Supreme Court. So you will find all kinds of reasons for overlooking seniority when it's convenient. You'll have no objective assessment of merit of the women. You will find various reasons that you want to appoint some particular person as a potential Chief Justice of India candidate, and therefore he must be taken to the Supreme Court. And there'll be all kinds of reasons and excuses. There's a huge amount of arbitrariness, and there's several reasons. It's a huge, debate in itself as to the manner in which appointments are made. And since we are restricting ourselves to gender discrimination here and gender equality, so I will confine my comments to this answer. But the answer is yes.
Does anyone else have? Yes, go ahead.
You can go ahead and address a question to each of the panelists as we wrap up. I know you were taking copious notes, and gender is your primary area of expertise, so I knew you would have good questions. So please do so.
Yes, I mean, for me, my main question actually had to go to Dr. Tong. I was extremely interested in sort of the role of social work in prisons. What I'm interested in right now is what I saw throughout the entire panel was a whole lot of conversation about how to integrate women into all of the different stages of the criminal justice system in India, right? How do we get more women as judges? How do we get more women as attorneys? How do we get more gender responsive services in our prisons or to our women who are coming up accusing people of crimes or any of these things, right? So how we increase women's representation in a system that already exists. What I'm interested in is, what I didn't hear is sort of a parallel process to what's been going on in the United States over the past couple of years, which is a focus on this sort of defund the police or defund the criminal justice system, or an abolition focus, in a way that, I was thinking so much about what Dr. Tong, what you were talking about, which is so familiar to those of us in the US. Many of my students are here listening to this presentation. Women who are dealing with abuse and neglect, women who are dealing with very low education levels, lack of understanding of what's going on. But what you were talking about was, how do we address this within the prison system, and then within reentry, which often resembles the prison system, right, in the disadvantage. So I'm curious, especially given the nature of women's crimes related so much to their sort of gender inferior, the way that they are treated because they are women. Is there any type of movement like that, and especially within the social work community?
Yes, so currently, social work was only introduced in 1990, because of the institute, the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, offering a course, a master's program in criminology and correctional administration. And it was this academic background that led the faculty to reach out to different criminal justice structures and to explore about whether, how a social work approach could be introduced. So currently, while we have, been making a lot of efforts to incorporate social workers into the system, this has taken a long time. In fact, we have been working on it for almost 30 years, but there are a lot of questions, including the funding, including the role that is going to be played. An interesting thing is that at the beginning there were welfare officers, there were liaison officers, there were probation officers, but all these officers kind of got given administrative roles, and the social work role somewhere got pushed onto the back burner. So today, there are many NGOs, many non-governmental organizations that are visiting prison. We have also been able to work at a systemic level where, we're asking for probation officers to visit prison. We're asking for welfare officers to be instituted, within prison and on the structure. But this has not really had the political will to do it. And prisoners still remain, very much as low priority. In fact, very interestingly and unfortunately as well, we don't have a structure that, facilitates reintegration post-release, which is why I said that prison as a period is looked at as a standalone. In fact, even prison officers will say, once a person is released, that's not our problem. And that's, the very sad part of it. But recently, Prayas, which is the organization that I'm representing, has signed a memorandum of understanding with the Maharashtra government for social workers to be in all the central prisons in Maharashtra. So this is a continuing journey, and we do hope that it's going to bear fruit soon. But it's an issue that still requires attention, because even, socially, people don't relate to the needs of prisoners.
Right. Certainly that is something common here in the United States, particularly in populations that are not represented themselves in our prisons and jails. I wonder just very quickly, because we have a couple of other questions, I wanted to just quickly direct a similar question to that to Dr. Belur and Dr. Bharatadas. Is there something similar going on when it comes to policing in India, the way that we have had in the US, sort of a movement, not so small and not so quiet, to sort of reimagine how much we sort of spend on policing, and what a huge role policing has in our society?
I think they missed the first part of your question, Vanessa. I think she wants, you were talking in terms of re-entry and policing?
More policing and sort of whether there's been a reimagining. We were talking Professor Jain was talking about the ways in which difference theory and Gilligan was leading to ways in which women sort of potentially interact differently and sort of present themselves differently. And I just wondered whether policing was changing to sort of be less punitive, if you will, as you know, in the way that we've been trying to do here in the US.
I'll ask Dr. Sandhya to have the first go, since she has got direct sort of knowledge of what's happening currently in India.
I understand that what is the role of policing? See, of course, from this punitive thing and all, we have changed so much. At least in Kerala, I can tell community engagement takes a front role, and understanding the problem at the community engagement level, and also when it comes to victims. Even a victim liaison officer is posted in Kerala Police to deal with a victim right from the beginning of a case, right from registration of an FIR. There is a victim liaison officer who assists her with the case even up to prosecution. And there is a free legal aid system also, which is facilitated at even the district level. So the policing role is becoming more positive nowadays. And of course, with the technology in hand, we have many apps which a woman in distress can use, which could be installed in a mobile phone. Then what we have done now, this Prashanti call center, where a woman can call in distress. Then women helpline number is available. This helpline 24 hours manned by women. These are all the positive changes. And of course, becoming a critical mass, it may take some more time. My wish is that 50% women and 50% men, including transgenders, should be the norm. And in fact, there was a ban for women to apply for any policing job. The Public Service Commission notification used to be the handicapped and women cannot apply. That was the notification, which is against Constitution in India. But that was the notification some time back. Now we have changed it. But at the constabulary level, it is still going on as a quota instead of opening up fully. And it is going to soon happen. Once it happens, people have a fear that, at least in Kerala, we may have to have some reservation for men because women excel in anything academics. It's a fact.
All right. So we do have a hard stop coming up now. I will say that we have a couple of questions from Beth Paransky and from Suprita Acharya. So, but I do know that we have to stop. I would like to say for myself, thank you so much to everyone. I'm sure that we will get contact information so that people can follow up on questions. And then I'll leave this to Sheetal.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, everyone, all panelists, of course, for your hard work, for this presentation, for getting where you did in your careers and lives. So I'm incredibly proud of each one of you. And thank you to all the people who attended at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning in New York City. It's not easy. Mondays are hard. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate all the attendees from CSW who participated. If you did register through the Montclair webinar link, we have your email address. What I will be doing is sharing a video recording of this presentation so you could listen to it again. I will also share any resources, contact information, and our flyer up there. So you would be able to reach out to us. And I shared my email in the chat somewhere, I think. If you have any specific questions, you can reach out to me and I will try and get them answered from the panelists for you. So thank you, everyone. AJ, if you can get all of us on the screen so we could all say goodbye, and thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.